everyone, welcome to Collapse Astrology. My name is Hummingbird and today's video is the first of 3 that I'll be releasing over the next week or so on Uranus's ingress into Gemini. The exact date of the first ingress is July 7th, and then over the fall, Uranus will crisscross the Taurus-Gemini threshold with a final, more permanent entrance into Gemini on April 25th of 2026. And this is the first time that Uranus has been in Gemini since the 1940s, so it is a big deal. It's a massive energetic transition. As we all know, the 1940s were a very tumultuous time, and we're also living through very tumultuous times right now. So knowing about this transit in advance, having some idea of what to expect, is pretty essential for navigating what is coming. For anyone who's new here or new to me and my work, I'm a mundane astrologer with a background in history and politics, and I've been creating political astrology content since 2018. I have a few solid predictions under my belt at this point. In particular, I predicted in the fall of 2023 that Kamala Harris would replace Biden in the 2024 presidential election and that she would lose to Trump. And you can see evidence of that in my election retrospective video titled "This is the US Pluto Return," which you can find linked in the description box. But the purpose of this type of astrology is less about prediction and more about anticipation. Understanding the astrological archetypes at play and the timelines astrology lays out for us can really help us to anticipate the road ahead, both in terms of challenges the energies might bring and how we can use them to our advantage. And that could not be more relevant when it comes to Uranus and Gemini. There are some big cosmic shifts coming in, but nothing is written in stone. Lord knows, with Uranus, nothing is predictable at all. And if we learn about these archetypes ahead of time, we can anchor them in the light, we can be intentional with them, and hopefully we can manifest something empowering instead of just the horrific path the world seems to be heading down right now. If you want to support this project, please hit like and subscribe here. Join me for my Sunday live streams, join the channel membership, sign up for my newsletter, and stick around for a few announcements at the end of the video. For now, let's get into it. So I had way too much to say about this transit to put it all in one video. So I'm going to give you a synopsis first of what I'll cover in each of the 3 parts. In today's video, we're going to talk about the most acute themes of Uranus and Gemini, which you see in the video title, Technology, Telepathy, and Information Warfare. You'll get to hear me go on a rant that I have been holding in for a long time against the telepathy haters, the so-called skeptics, and I will be naming names, giving some specific examples of public figures whose closed-minded takes and sad, rigid brains in general I think Uranus is about to render obsolete. And we'll talk about the ongoing progression into the post-truth world, the way narratives are about to fragment even more, and at the end, we'll touch on the almost too obvious theme of cryptocurrencies and the stock market. And then in the next 2 videos, we'll go way deeper into the rabbit hole. The second video will focus on the 3rd United States Uranus return, which happens in 2027 to 2028, and for those who don't know, has a pretty nasty track record. So we'll talk about Uranus in the US natal chart, its correspondence to the military-industrial complex, and what happened during the first 2 Uranus returns. And then in the 3rd video, I might have my good old tinfoil hat on the whole time because I'll be giving my thoughts on non-human intelligence, breakaway civilizations, end times fascism, effective accelerationism, and who even knows what else. All this stuff is interconnected, as we will see, and it is dark, but this is Collapse Astrology after all, and I always come back to one of my guiding quotes from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Astrology gives us the gift of an archetypal framework that can help us face what is here now, as well as the energies we'll be working with in the future. And that is how we grab the wheel of reality back from those who would like to steer this world towards death and destruction. So with that said, let's get into these nice light subjects of technology, telepathy, and information warfare. But before we get there explicitly, we need to talk a little more about Uranus. If you're an astro nerd, you probably know about Richard Tarnas and his book Cosmos and Psyche. Cosmos and Psyche is a nearly 1,000-page book that analyzes Western history through the lens of outer planet transits. Like pretty much all the white boomer astrologers who dominated the field until social media came along, Tarnas has basically zero analysis of empire, but the book is pretty profound, pretty revolutionary because he is a scholar of Western history. He knows his stuff in terms of events and timelines, and unless you're someone whose whole identity is based on being a skeptic, you can't really read it and deny that major events and turning points, at least in the so-called West, unfold alongside major astrological alignments. But what I want to bring in here is a short essay that Tarnas published in 1993 called Prometheus the Awakener. In this essay, he makes the case that the name Uranus is a misnomer, and that the archetypal qualities of the planet Uranus are actually a match for Prometheus, the Titan who stole fire from the gods and shared it with humans. Uranus is Saturn's father in mythology, so it made logical sense to name the planet after Saturn, Uranus. But as astrologers have observed how Uranus the planet shows up in natal charts and in transits, it's definitely clear that there's a mismatch. Uranus the god is a straight-edge monarch who is eventually overthrown. But Uranus the planet is a force that tends to rebel against authority and attempts to overthrow norms and traditions. So I want to take Tarnas's analysis further. Maybe I'll write my own essay one day, but my proposal is that the fire Uranus the planet brought in is technology itself. Not only is Uranus the first planet discovered by technology, the first planet discovered by telescope in 1781, it was also discovered at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when major technological developments were taking place in everything from textiles to steel production to steam engines, and from chemistry to electromagnetism to astronomy. Also, Tarnas explains the reason for the misnomer as being that Prometheus is a trickster, but I think it goes much deeper than that. I think a more important analogy is that Prometheus was stealthy in his thievery. He disguised himself when he snuck up to Mount Olympus to steal the fire, he hid it in a hollow stalk to bring it down, and he shared it with humanity before the gods could stop its paradigm-shifting effect on civilization. So it just makes sense that Prometheus would sneak into history under the guise of another god. No matter what sign it's in, Uranus brings major themes of technological development. I actually have a whole analysis that looks at the history of the internet through the lens of Uranus ingresses, especially since the development of the World Wide Web around the time of the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the early 1990s. And if you want to know more about that, you're in luck because I'm offering a one-off masterclass covering that material at the end of July. More on that is in the description box below and at the conclusion of the video here. But for now, let's focus on Uranus and Gemini and what kind of technological shifts we might see coming up. One thing that's super interesting is that the last 3 Uranus ingresses have corresponded to the rise in the 3 main social media apps, the ones that have sort of defined different social media generations. So Facebook was born in 2003, right as Uranus entered Pisces. Then Instagram was launched in 2010 as Uranus entered Aries. And in 2018, TikTok came on the scene in the US as Uranus entered Taurus. So we'll have to keep an eye out for the new one. I don't think I see any sign of it yet, but I'm not super clued in. Like, does anyone know what the Gen Alphas are using? Is there a new app for 10-year-olds? I would love to hear in the comments if anyone has any ideas about what is next. But either way, more than Pisces or Aries or Taurus, Gemini has themes of communication, language, information, storytelling, and so we most likely will see some big changes in the way our technology orients to these things. Obviously, there's AI, and AI has really direct correspondence to Pluto and Aquarius timing-wise, because ChatGPT was released right as Pluto first entered Aquarius in early 2023. Aquarius is also an air sign, also associated with technology, especially the type that interconnects us. But I think Uranus and Gemini will see even more proliferation of AI, and I think it will take us further into the post-truth world. With Gemini, everything fragments, everything scatters. Things can lose context easily. And this can be a superpower of Gemini, this mental flexibility, this capacity to see new angles of the truth and articulate them. That's why uber Geminis like Bob Dylan or Ralph Waldo Emerson or Tupac or Kendrick Lamar can create such lyrical, poetic storytelling magic. So I do hope that we can use this energy on the personal level to open our minds and wake up from our rigid programming in various ways. But I think when it comes to technology and the effect it has on us, we're going to see this further fragmentation in what different people believe. I have very mixed feelings on AI, and I'll get into more of that in the third video. But one of the things that worries me is how it hallucinates, and how it hallucinates so convincingly. I think most people are familiar with this by now, but if you're not, what that means is that AIs like ChatGPT just make shit up. One example of this is way back when ChatGPT first came out, I was seeing what it knew about astrology, and I asked it if it knew of any famous people who had Mercury conjunct Uranus in their natal chart. And it came back to me immediately with like Bob Dylan, Albert Einstein, Gandhi, and Jim Morrison. And those are all people who it would make total sense if they did have that alignment, but actually none of them do. So it knew enough to put the archetypes together, but instead of just telling me it didn't have the capacity to actually check charts or whatever, it just hallucinated. It just gave me these logical results, but they were wrong. So it's pretty scary how now the first result we see on Google is an AI result, and how so many people are using it as their main source of research. Obviously, not to mention people who are just using it to write their research papers or write other stuff. Most people have heard about things like the lawyers in California who used it to write a court briefing and it cited a bunch of precedent cases that it just made up, or how the Chicago Sun-Times published a summer reading list that was made up of books that didn't really exist. There was also a study from MIT that came out recently with findings that people who used an LLM to help them write an essay had way diminished brain activity, way less neurons firing during the process than people who had used a search engine that wasn't an LLM. And worse than that, there's so much potential for actual information warfare, for the weaponization of AI to at least attempt to literally rewrite the past or to keep the truth away from people. We're already so inundated with AI slop content, whether that's here on YouTube, on other social media sites, in advertising, and it's likely coming more to TV, to news publications, etc., etc. Recently, there's been a rash of American military propaganda videos that are actually AI, aimed at Gen Z and at people of color. And there's a quote from Steve Bannon in 2016 where he said that the way to counter Democrat or liberal media narratives was to, quote, flood the zone with shit. And I think we'll see more and more of that, just so much content competing for our attention, as well as things like deep fakes, which will only get harder and harder to distinguish as AI video generation improves. Flooding the zone with shit has also long been a counterintelligence strategy, way before Bannon said it, used by government actors working to confuse public narratives about their criminal actions. So sadly, I just think we ain't seeing nothing yet when it comes to how fractured and fragmented the information landscape is about to become. As the quality of AI tech improves, realistic deepfakes will get easier to create, and it will become harder and harder to tell if something is real or not. One thing I'll say here is that if you want to counter this, having a regular somatic practice is crucial. Something daily or close to daily where you intentionally bring your mind and your energy down into your body. The Gemini energy will be like strong winds blowing in multiple directions at once, and it will be easier than ever to lose your internalized sense of reality and get lost in the storm of information and stories. So we need to keep putting the roots of our awareness back in our bodies day after day. Your body, your gut, can at least give you some sense of what's real and what's not. I know for myself, I can feel it when I read AI writing. Even if someone has done some editing, like made some tweaks, if they use ChatGPT to write their newsletter or whatever, I can smell it. And it's not just because they use the long em dash, which I have always used in my writing, by the way. It's an internal sense. Right now, it's still pretty easy to tell visually with videos, but like I said, that will change. So I recommend, if you don't already have a practice of rerouting your consciousness in your body, get on that. Cultivate your interoception, and it will at least have some guidance for you on what is material reality versus what is just floating, unrooted information. So now, speaking of material reality and information, let's get into our third subject, telepathy. I'm about to go on something of a rant. This is the kind of thing I think about when I can't sleep at night, the kind of thing I argue in my head with the haters about, and I'm just gonna let it out, hopefully without too many ad hominems. One reason I get so worked up about the subject is that the haters are so arrogant, so smug in their intellectual superiority, when in reality, they're just laying their spiritual immaturity out on the table for the world to see. They're like toddlers throwing fits from the perspective of spiritual development, but they see themselves as superior beings because they don't believe in anything beyond the material realm. And they have platforms, and they feel the need to comment on the subject, as we'll get into, in ways that are intellectually dishonest and intellectually lazy. They won't engage with it fully, because they're babies and they can't handle something that threatens their worldview, but they still choose to make content on it, and it just grosses me out. Before we get to the haters, though, let me say a little bit about why I think this will be a major theme of Uranus and Gemini. One of the central themes of Gemini is information and information exchange. Again, this is why so many incredible writers and poets, lyricists and storytellers are Geminis, because they have an innate ability to play with information, to take something mundane and spit it back out in a new form that allows an idea or a narrative to be communicated more clearly, to land with others more deeply. At least this is one of the Gemini superpowers. Obviously, there are shadow sides too, but in its high vibe form, Gemini is all about creating this kind of information exchange for the purpose of evolving intelligence, helping others see new perspectives, creating greater levels of intellectual understanding. And telepathy, at its core, is information exchange. Information is not physical. You could think of it as software, with the physical body, especially our brains and our nervous systems, as the hardware that the information plugs into and plays itself out through. We exchange information through talking, through writing, through reading or watching or listening to what other people have written. And these days, information exchange happens a lot through our technology. Digital technology translates information into code, into ones and zeros, and allows it to be passed through tech hardware from one brain to another much more quickly and widely than it could spread without the tech. Telepathy is basically information exchange without a physical medium directly facilitating the exchange. Now, Uranus, of course, is about tech, but it's also about breakthroughs and the breaching of barriers. It's about new bursts of information coming in all at once. That is why it's associated with strokes of genius. And that's another reason why the Prometheus archetype clicks so well, because fire in the Prometheus myth was something that was given to humanity and spread far and wide all at once, as fire tends to do. Sometimes Uranus is described as the higher octave of Mercury. And while Mercury is related to sort of like linear movement of information, like reading a book or listening to someone speak, Uranus is about downloads, where a whole burst, a whole set of information lands all at once, like a lightning strike. And telepathy tends to be information that comes in all at once. It might come in as words or concepts or images or emotions, and it might take some linear time to translate, to bring forth or process through the hardware of our brains and nervous systems and voices and pens, etc. But it's very Uranian in terms of its essential nature. So I think we're going to see a lot more about telepathy in mainstream conversation as Uranus moves through Gemini. And I think we may start to have easier access to it ourselves, at least if we're open to it. Obviously, for the most part, if you don't believe in telepathy, it won't work for you. You could have an email address and someone could send you an email, but if you don't believe that you have an email address and therefore, of course, you never check your email, or you don't even know how to check your email, yeah, you're never going to get that message. But for people who the door to their mind is at least cracked open regarding the possibility of telepathy, it may get much easier to access during this transit. And we've already seen a very beautiful precursor to this shift in the release of the Telepathy tapes. If you're not familiar, the Telepathy tapes is a podcast series created and hosted by Kai Dickens that first came out in the fall of 2024. There are other more expansive episodes that have come out since then, but the original 10 episodes mainly focus on the stories of several sets of parents and their nonverbal autistic children, and the telepathic communication between the parents and the kids' telepathic communication with each other. It's mostly interviews, and there are also several episodes where they conduct experiments in telepathy, and they're not experiments that would be accepted by a scientific journal. In my opinion, the podcast is very honest about that and why that is, and they never try to present any of it as proven fact. They're just sharing the stories of these kids and their parents. And so you can go listen to it if you like. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the process, but I'll just say, if you are someone who needs things to be scientifically proven before you'll accept them as reality, if you're someone who thinks our current modes of measuring and proving things are all-encompassing enough to explain all phenomena on Earth, I don't know what you're doing on an astrology channel, first of all. If that is you, you are in the wrong place. I am not for you, I am not in conversation with you, and you should probably just give me a good old thumbs down and head elsewhere. But now let's talk about the haters. Unsurprisingly, the Telepathy tapes has lots of haters, so I'm just going to use two examples here. The first one is Dr. Devin Price, a queer autistic influencer who I used to follow until I read his article on the Telepathy tapes, and then I had to unfollow because I have no interest in learning from someone with such a closed mind to this kind of thing. And the other is the Conspirituality podcast. I used to follow them ages ago, and I do have to credit them with teaching me about cult dynamics in their early episodes, which was a big part of my own acceptance that I had been in a cult. But I stopped following them as their platform grew because their vibe just got so gross and smug and arrogant, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. But when the Telepathy tapes came out, I couldn't help going to check if they'd posted about it, and unsurprisingly they had. They actually have 3 podcast episodes debunking it, plus some inane Instagram posts, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And so here's the thing with both of these people's critiques. It's actually extremely obvious that they didn't listen to the podcast, or at least not anything close to listening to it in its entirety. I'll link everything down below, but in Devin's Substack piece, if you scroll through the comments, which you can see a few of here on the screen, multiple commenters say, it doesn't seem like you actually listen to the podcast. And if you read his responses to those comments, he never actually replies saying, yes, I did, or giving any indication at all that he did. Obviously, if someone was accusing you of not having listened and you had, you would push back and say that you had, right? And then there's this post from Conspirituality, where they literally recommend to their followers to skip directly to episode 10, the final episode of the original series that broaches some of the more out there subjects like spirit communication and simulation theory. And not only are they infantilizing their own audience by saying, you'll be too pilled if you listen from the beginning, you'll fall for the hoax, you aren't capable of telling for yourself what's real and what's not. Also, the projection here is really insane. They accuse Kai and the podcast of stealing agency and personality away from the subjects because they just absolutely cannot imagine that these teenagers could possibly be more interested in making positive spiritual changes on Earth than playing video games. So in 3 sentences right there, they are trying to steal agency away from the kids who A, absolutely do want to talk about the communication processes that support them and do want to share it with others. And B, there is one kid who loves to make music. He's on multiple episodes, which if they had actually taken the time to listen to the whole thing, obviously they would have known, and they would have at least chosen a different example of a typical teenager's interest to make their pathetic point. Now, I'm not here to convince you the Telepathy tapes is hard science. I'm not here to convince you to believe in it, and I'm not here to offer any analysis of the podcast or its methods. This is a video about Uranus and Gemini. Telepathy is one of many different themes of the transits, and these haters are just a tiny corner of my analysis. And like I said before, I'm not here to be in conversation with people who are skeptical of the reality of spiritual shit. I am here for the people who are done wasting time on that debate. I'm here for the people who have graduated into the humbling space of knowing that there is way, way more to this world and this universe than humans will ever be able to grasp or understand, much less prove. I'm here for the people who want to be in reverence to that mystery and lean into it with the big questions of how we can channel it to change this world for the better. But I did need to get this rant off my shoulders. When it comes to ordinary people who don't believe in realities beyond the material realm, which actually is a lot of leftists who I consider my people, I feel a little sad for those people, but I don't feel angry at them. I believe that everyone has a timeline for spiritual awakening, and I hope that theirs comes at exactly the right moment. But with these haters who have big platforms, it's something else. Because again, these takes are intellectually lazy and intellectually dishonest. They didn't actually listen to the podcast, but they took it upon themselves to make content about it. And they present their hubristic, condescending opinions to the public as if they did. They never admit that they didn't listen. It's just super obvious to anyone who actually did. And this is just gross to me. If you don't want to listen to something that challenges your worldview, fine, just stay away. But if you're going to offer a public critique, if you're going to make content about it, which at least in the case of conspirituality means also making money from it with the ads they run on their podcast episodes, JFC. At least take the time to listen to the whole thing. Now, just for total transparency, I didn't listen to all 3 conspirituality episodes on the telepathy tapes. I listened to the first one, I could barely stomach it, but like I said, this rant is just a tiny corner of a larger analysis that has nothing to do with those episodes. And if I were ever going to make an entire video or multiple videos about those episodes, I would obviously listen to all of them. So getting back to our bigger picture here, I think with Uranus and Gemini, it's going to get harder and harder for this type of denial to hold any water. Maybe we actually will get some solid scientific evidence of telepathic communication. It seems like the telepathy tapes crew was starting to move in that direction. And in the third part of the series, we'll discuss a much broader swath of subjects that crisscross the realms of science and spirituality, like psionics and psychotronic weapons, remote viewing, non-human intelligence, and lots more. It's all super relevant to this transit, and I really think we're about to get our minds blown in the next 7 years when it comes to public revelations about this type of technology. And my regular audience knows this, but for any newer viewers, I do just want to say, I am not a love and light spirituality type person. A lot of my content is about the shadows of this 3-dimensional world. To a certain level, at least, I'm a scholar. I guess I could call myself an autodidact because I'm mostly self-taught, but I know my shit about history and politics, especially Western history and politics, and the very, very dark realities there. I've read a lot about the collapse of complex civilizations. I also know my shit decently about neurobiology, about the body and brain and nervous system. And I am massively against spiritual takes that bypass these material realities and just tell us that if we anchor the light and choose love, we'll have some kind of spontaneous ascension into a utopian world. I don't have a very optimistic outlook on this current iteration of humanity at all. I think we may very well be headed towards an evolutionary bottleneck, if not a full-on planetary extinction. But I do believe in our higher potentials, and I do believe that we can live into them even in a time of global collapse. And I think that it's naive and so egoic, so myopic and small-minded to deny these larger realities, the dimensions and forces and beings and truths that are so much bigger than us. And I guess it's my mission to bridge these realms, the political with the spiritual, the material with the immaterial, the solid with the transcendent, and maybe even doomerism with optimism. And I hope that with my message and my research and my perspective and maybe even my rants, that I'm supporting humanity in the process of evolving into a better version of ourselves, one that isn't so destructive and so locked in our base instincts. Okay, before I finish, I do have to touch on two last themes of Uranus ingresses. The first is real quick, but it's fascinating. The last two Uranus ingresses have corresponded to major weather events that matched the elements being activated by Uranus. March 11th, 2011, the exact day Uranus entered Aries from Pisces, a tsunami struck Japan and led to the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And in May 2018, when Uranus was moving from Aries into Taurus, an earthquake on the island of Hawaii triggered the Kilauea volcanic eruption, a slow lava flow that lasted about 4 months and destroyed over 700 structures. Now, this may not happen every time. I couldn't find any significant weather events during the ingress from Aquarius into Pisces in 2003, and I didn't look back any further than that. But it's definitely interesting and just something to keep in mind over the next 8 months. The other theme is something that I could have focused a whole video on, but it's a little too predictive and a little too clickbaity, so I decided to just bring it in at the end here, and that is the stock market. Uranus in Taurus has corresponded to the largest transfer of wealth in history, a massive stock market bubble, and especially the basically fake money bubble of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The first Bitcoin run was happening in 2017 to 2018 when Uranus was moving into Taurus. And since then, we've had two major crypto crashes, a lot of turbulence and up and down, very Uranus coded. And now, as I'm recording on July 3rd, Bitcoin is just about at its highest valuation ever. Taurus, of course, is related to money and the markets, and it's a sign that consolidates resources. It likes to store things away and create security for itself. So as I'm recording with Uranus at 29 Taurus, it makes a lot of sense that wealth is at its most consolidated. But in Gemini, everything changes. Like I've been saying, everything fragments and scatters. I don't know that this will happen immediately. It might only be a small bubble burst over the summer since Uranus will be back in Taurus from September through April of 2026. But it's just hard to see this not happening by sometime next year. Not only crypto, but a full-on market crash. With Pluto's entrance into Aquarius and the rise of BRICS and other movement towards a multipolar world, at some point, de-dollarization will start to get more real. And there was an interesting thing that happened after Trump's tariffs announcements in the spring, this shaking of the US bond market, which is usually where large investors move their money when regular stocks of public companies are looking unstable. And Trump ended up walking back some of the tariffs because major investors started to sell their bonds, which means they were losing faith in US economic standing on the world stage. So that was a temporary reprieve, but again, especially with the astrological archetypes we have at play, it seems like it's only a matter of time before that movement away from the dollar and US economic stability becomes a real unstoppable transition. Now, I do not think that crypto is over because of what we'll get into in part 3. Breakaway civilizations, the techno-fascist dreams of people like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, and so many others. But these dreams, these civilizations in the minds of their creators are for a very, very small elite. And it doesn't include all the mid-level investors who have gotten rich off crypto in the past few years. The people at the very top have ways of consolidating wealth during times of economic crisis, and your average crypto investor is just another person they plan to steal from. So I think we'll see a lot of these average people who have gotten used to living large off their dividends lose it all. These are also a lot of the same people making high salaries in fintech and other white-collar tech jobs, which are likely to dry up fast as AI takes over. Again, the elites at the very top already see this coming, and they're planning to consolidate even more wealth as it happens. So unfortunately, I don't think they will lose it all as Uranus and Gemini plays out. But I do think that a lot of people who are rich compared to the majority of working class Americans will see their fake money vanish. And that will suck for all of us ultimately, but at least we might get a little satisfaction watching it happen. in, because I think Uranus and Gemini can be an equalizer in that sense. And economically, it could bring us to a place where actual skills for living and survival become more valuable, while skills like moving numbers around on a computer screen become less valuable. Okay, so with that, we'll finish part 1. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you're new here, hit subscribe and maybe even hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next 2 parts, because like I said, we are only going deeper from here. Also, become a channel member if you like. It's just $2.99 a month, and this month we'll be starting our members-only live stream that will be both a Q&A and also a live divination session. There's a poll up for members now to find the best time for the July stream. You're also invited to my masterclass on astrology and the rise of big tech, which I think is really crucial historical context for understanding where we're headed with Uranus and Gemini. So you can learn more about that at the link below. And you can join me for free in early August at the Revolution Rising Summit. I'm speaking on the US Pluto return, and there are 19 other astrologers offering short classes on all kinds of other interesting subjects. You can also find a link below to register for that. For more tailored information on how Uranus and Gemini could impact you personally, head over to my other channel, Horoscopes by Hummingbird, where you'll find rising sign horoscope videos that explore how this transit will affect each house. On this channel, part 2 of this series on the 3rd US Uranus return will be out in just a day or 2, and the 3rd part will be out in about the next week. I also do weekly public live streams here on Sunday evenings, which are sort of an astro news show where I talk about the current astrology and how it's manifesting in the headlines. And those are fun. I just started them last month, and so far the chat seems to be filled with other smart, radical astro nerds. So if that is you, come and join us. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram at Collapse Astrology, and you can find the link to my offerings page in the description box if you want some personalized astrological guidance. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time.